Hello, my name is Jonathan McIntosh, and in this video I would like to talk to you about how to give a successful presentation for a university assessment. In this video I'm going to talk about three main aims. I'm going to talk about what makes a good presentation, provide tips on how to structure a presentation so that your audience can follow your ideas and the development of your train of thought. And I'm also going to discuss some issues to do with how best to deliver a presentation, how to keep your audience's attention and ensure that you get across the great points that you have to tell them. So, as with most assessments, the first place to start is to make sure that you understand the task that's been set, and this is usually outlined in the unit guide. Then it's important to brainstorm about the task, the question that's been set, and any other terms that might be associated with the presentation. Once you've thought about the presentation and brainstormed for a short while, then you need to gather your information from various sources, such as readings, books, book chapters, journals, lecture documentaries, lecture notes, etc. And once you have all this material, then you need to organise it logically into a sequence that will make sense in helping you to answer the task that's been set. And then once you have the material in a logical order, then you can start to develop a plan or a structure for your presentation. Plans are really important, and having a strong structure to a presentation, particularly for a short presentation, makes all the difference. So, preparation makes a really good presentation. Taking time to think about the task that you've been sent, finding appropriate resources, and then organising these materials. But the delivery also helps to get across the points that you're trying to make in a very congenial fashion, and it also helps, the preparation and the delivery helps to reinforce the structure of a presentation. So all presentations should have an introduction where you tell the audience what you are going to tell them in the presentation. What's the purpose? So you need to grab the audience's attention and introduce the topic or the thesis that's going to be discussed. You then need to clearly outline the main points and usually support this with some visual outline. So an outline, a PowerPoint slide that outlines the presentation if you're using PowerPoint, or you might outline the aims of the presentation. Clearly state each of these main points or the aims on any visual aids that you might be using. Following the introduction, the body of the presentation then provides the main points and as well as supporting points. This should be the section where you give details and examples taken from research and resources in order to help support, explain and substantiate the points that you're making in the presentation. Finally, after you've gone through the main points or the aims in the order that they were raised or addressed in the introduction, you should conclude the presentation. So you sum up all the main points, you refer back to the question or the thesis of the presentation, and the conclusion should be well grounded in terms of what is said in the body of the presentation. You can write your presentation in full or write detailed notes to which you can refer as you present the presentation. In terms of content, you should make sure that the ideas are logical and they are clear. Remember that people in the audience might not know about the topic that you're discussing, but they also might be very well informed. So You need to explain points for the reader, not the reader, the audience, and try not to necessarily assume knowledge of those in the audience. So explain key terms, for example, and points that you might need to clarify. Use examples and facts also to illustrate the points that you are making in terms of content. Make sure that your language is appropriate to the audience as well as the purpose of the presentation. Generally, you should try to adopt a formal but conversational tone. Don't try to be too colloquial in an oral presentation, but also be aware of that you don't want to sound too formal. Giving a presentation, for example, uses a different form of English than that which we might use for formal university assessments, such as essays or report writing. Also try to avoid any use of slang in your presentation. Try to make it more kind of semi-formal. Summarize the talk into meaningful chunks, either through the use of numbers or bullet points on slides, and use evidence drawn from resources in order to help support these points. Use points as brief notes to guide you through your talk. And these could be written points on cards, or you could highlight specific words in the written version of your presentation. But you can also use points on the PowerPoint if you're using a visual aid in order to help guide you through your talk. Practicing your presentation is key to a successful outcome in terms of assessment. And practicing can help to show you what you need to fix in order to make your talk flow logically, in order to connect from one slide to the next. It can also show you what you need to edit or clarify. The possibilities for connecting with your audience are greater when you know your material so well that you can get out of your own head. So you don't necessarily always need to be reading your presentation or referring to notes, but you feel confident enough that you know the material to give a good presentation. Practicing also makes you feel more confident and comfortable about giving the presentation. So you're less likely to be nervous in such a context. If you are presenting in a group, practicing is also important because you need to figure out how you're going to transition from one person to the next and how you're going to hand over from one person to the next without necessarily wasting time, particularly if it's a short presentation. So in order to practice for maximum effect in your presentation, it's best to write out your main points on several cards and then to practice these out loud from the cards. So being a good speaker means learning to embody your topic by speaking it aloud, not just reading your presentation to yourself. And sometimes students can put together very good presentations, but because they just stand at the front of the class and read their notes without necessarily looking up and engaging the audience or referring to their visual aids such as PowerPoint, it can mean that they don't necessarily get as good a mark as they should for their presentation. While you're out walking, for example, is a great way to practice or memorize your material. This gives you the advantage of multi-focusing in the learning process. You're saying the words to yourself and hopefully also managing to navigate the footpath, the trees, and any stones on the path, for example. This is great practice for when you're presenting and have to focus on what you're saying as well as what's going on in the room, for example. In particular, you want to practice the opening and closing remarks of a presentation because these set the first and the last impressions with the marker and the audience members. So practice, practice, practice. You really want to give a presentation that your audience is going to enjoy. You have some fantastic ideas and you want to communicate them to the best of your ability to those in the room. So interest your audience from the beginning of your presentation. Try and grab their attention, hook them into the topic that you're going to discuss. And this is where a very effective introduction will really help to set up your presentation. And there are various techniques that you can use when presenting in a classroom context. So remember that listening for extended periods of time can be tiring, particularly if you're having to focus on different presenters. And therefore, it's important that you don't just read your presentation from the text all the time or from cards. Because if you just read your presentation, your voice might come across to the audience as being monotonous or sounding the same. And to make a presentation effective, you need to use various vocal techniques such as timbre or levels of pitch. Silences are quite effective sometimes in drawing attention to specific words or meanings or points that you wish to get across. The way that you use your voice in relation to any visual aids, such as PowerPoint, is important. Sometimes I like to point towards a presentation in order to point towards the visual aid in order to underscore a point that I'm making in the presentation. Linking between slides and between different presenters is essential to generate a sense of flow to the presentation and also to signpost to your audience as you move through the task. Being aware of how we use our bodies in presentations is also a key understanding to the success of many presentations. So some people might move their hands quite a lot in a presentation, but this might seem to make their movements seem very busy to members in the audience. But if you stand with your hands in your pockets or your hands by your side all the time, it might make you seem quite stiff or still or slouching with a presentation. So maybe practice in the mirror or get someone to record you on their phones, and by reviewing these recordings then, or asking someone to provide you with constructive criticism on the use of your body as you present, it can help you to use your body movement effectively, to not necessarily draw attention away from the points you are trying to make, but to communicate them in a much clearer and concise manner. You can use notes and cards, or you can even have a full script of your presentation. But please, if you do use these aids, don't read from them all the time, but try to memorize or know the material well enough so that you can look up from these memory aids and engage with your audience by looking at them, for example. Looking at people can be a tremendously effective way of getting your point across. And if you use all of these various techniques effectively, that means that you don't have to turn the sprinklers on in order to keep your audience awake, as it says in this cartoon. In conclusion, planning the presentation plays a very important role in helping you to formulate an effective talk. Use the structure of the presentation to help guide the audience, and use transitions and links between different sections to reinforce the structure. Practice the presentation and employ suitable presentation techniques. And by gaining feedback on your presentation style before giving an assessment in class can be a very effective way of helping you to achieve greater success.